It's the OVGA Podcast.
Hey everyone, welcome back.
Hi there, Sanford.
Hey, hey Lee, hey Dan.
Hi
Hey,
everyone.
Dan.
Hey,
So-
great to see you, Lee. It's been a long time. Nice catching up.
Oh,
So
thank you.
We've got a special guest with us today, Lee MacLeod, illustrator, first artist that we've had on our podcast, actually. So we're excited to talk with Lee about his career, not just video games, but kind of how he became an artist, how he got into games, some of the pieces he's worked on, and some of his stories and anything he can remember and be willing to share with us. So we're gonna run through it today. For anyone newly joining, of course, this is the OVGA podcast. Dan and I help run a Facebook group, the Original Video Game Art Collectors, and the website originalvideogameart.com. But over to you, Dan.
Yeah, I guess the first thing we wanted to touch on was just sort of the breadth of your career, Lee. Like you've done a lot of different things in your life as an illustrator and beyond. I know you worked a little bit on, well, obviously the game packaging art, the Nintendo Power illustrations, which were kind of closely related. There's been a lot of book covers, I understand. There's been movie poster work. I know you even did a few of the Marvel cards. I know lately you've been doing a lot of plein air landscapes. So just a real, breadth to your career and many different things that you've, been involved in. And so I'm sure we'll touch on some or all those as we go, and we're excited to do that. So
Sounds great.
Awesome. Do you want to start, Lee, maybe just by telling us a little bit about, kind of how you got into art, how you, where the interest started, how you end up at Art Center, like the origin story, so to speak.
Right. Well, I always drew as a kid, and very much enjoyed it, and ended up going to college at Colorado College, which had a strong art department, and but I didn't take advantage of the art department. It was college, so what I did do is I focused heavily on the art history part of it, but the actual making of art I kind of just slid by. And afterwards, I realized I really needed to, focus. And I was lucky enough to be accepted at Art Center College of Design, and went through the program in 3 years, got out. I had an interesting portfolio. I had a lot of images from my time at Art Center that lent themselves to horror movies. And John Carpenter had just started come out with his, which I'm trying to think which one of the first John Carpenter. It was, blanking, it'll come.
I'm not a big horror movie buff either.
Right.
Was he the Thing, or was he?
It was
I don't even know.
It was the guy in the hockey mask with the knife. Whoever that was.
Jason.
Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you. Anyway, so I ended up doing some comps for that, and that led to more things. And there was a couple of A-type films that didn't really make it very far, but Wolfen was one of them with Albert Finney, and so all of a sudden I found myself with a rep and a fair amount of work.
Terrific. And if we could go back for a second too, because we said really briefly that you made it into Art Center, and we kind of gloss over that, but like that was kind of a big deal then, wasn't it? Like it was a very prestigious school.
Yes, it was. It's a great school, and you were accepted on the basis of your portfolio. And I worked really hard putting together something that I hoped would impress them, prior to applying. And I guess I was lucky, and it did, because they gave me advanced standing, and that's why I was able to go in 3 years as opposed to 4.
Oh wow! Okay, so you got to actually skip a year.
Yes.
Oh wow!
So from when you finished up at Colorado College, when was it that you then entered into Art Center? Was that shortly thereafter, a year or two?
Yeah, it was a year later.
Okay.
I graduated from Colorado College and spent a summer in Europe. But I actually, strangely enough, got very focused on actually making some art while in Europe. I studied with a English instructor or an instructor from England in Florence, and a lot of life drawing and a lot of architectural drawing. So it was both a lot of fun and really a great help in putting together that portfolio.
Oh, terrific. That's interesting. So you go on this European holiday, but you end up working the whole time to get into school.
Yeah. It was kind of odd how that came about, but it was my sister lived in Florence, still does, and so I was there actually for almost 3 months, and it gave me a chance to take that class, and then when I got to Scotland, I once again was able to stay with someone, and there for a fairly long time, and once again able to really spend each day going out drawing and just sort of researching, going to art museums. It was I guess I just figured maybe it was time.
You decided what you'd wanted to do and you went after it.
Right.
Now, I think it sounds like, you would have known you wanted to do art, wanted to go after art, but going into Art Center, did you think you were going to end up doing illustration?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I thought pretty sure that I was going to be that would be the focus when I was there. It was funny. I was sort of fascinated by the car design department, but it was all about the how cool these cars were that they were designing. But I'm not much of a car person, so I said to myself, yeah, well, they look great, but I don't know what they know, so I'm not even going to bother try to make any kind of shift there.
Dan, did I don't know.
Are you thinking of Rush Hour right now? That's what I'm thinking of. That's where my mind went. I know one of your pieces is a race car theme.
It's funny. Where my mind went was Bill Morrison, right? So I don't know if you know of Bill Morrison, Simpsons Art Lee, but he, I think in Detroit area, he was doing a lot of technical illustration, maybe automotive related. Before he made that switch to Disney, and he always credited that focus on the technical aspect for the precision that made that transition to doing Disney work with very high expectations and seamless. So it's fascinating to hear that Art Center had this whole automotive division, and you hold the students to these high standards to make that happen.
Yeah, Art Center was so completely different from what I had expected. I expected it to be difficult, but it was a challenge. They really made everyone work hard.
And so at your time there, because we have a sense or sort of this expectation, maybe Sanford, that, that a lot of you guys that were running in, maybe the same circles, and particularly if there was work for Denny involved, sort of knew each other. But we don't know if that's actually the case. Like, who do you meet there? Who do you know? Who do you meet in later life? Like,
well, I overlapped with Greg Martin extensively, and that's how we became quite close. But there was there were other guys at the school at the time, but they weren't in my class that actually ended up doing game art. So they were sort of slightly either ahead of me or behind me. And then of course, upon getting out, Greg Winters, there were just a number of other illustrators. There was a group, two guys called the Hom brothers,
sure,
and John Hom and his
Phillip.
brother, and they were, amazing to hang around with. And I had this really great situation. After I had a studio that I shared with a guy who was a professional art photographer, and he would shoot 4x5s, 8x10s for um, most of the illustrators in the LA area. So there was a constant stream of great art coming through the door, and it was not only great to see, but it was also like, oh boy, I better up my game. Look how good that piece is, and that was really a lot of fun.
Wow.
In retrospect, when I moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, I really, which was a great move for us and the family as a family, but I did miss the camaraderie that I had there with all these guys that you would inevitably see.
And so you had all these people kind of coming into your studio space basically, and bringing their art by, and you're getting to meet everybody and so on. You're seeing all the
Correct.
originals up close, and that's terrific. Who was the photographer, if you don't mind me asking?
His Richard Tremarchi. He goes by the name Blue, and he has a studio out there. He still doing photography for artists, but he also puts together and publishes books for various artists. Very sophisticated, high end.
Terrific.
So with him, with artists coming in to have their artwork photographed, is that so that they didn't have to send the original in to the client so they could keep it? Was it just for their portfolios, for their records?
It was in some cases it was both. Initially, it was primarily for records. The art directors wanted the original art. Then, as things became a little more sophisticated, you could start sending transparencies, and they were thrilled to get that. It was less expensive for everyone. And if they got a transparency, looked at it, they could say, oh, gosh, if your sky was green or greener, this would work much better with our type. And so you actually had the illustration there in front of you, and you could make that change, shoot a new transparency, and send that. And it was sort of the precursor to what computers can do, where when an illustrator does something on a computer and sends it, they can make tons of changes. Either ask the illustrator to do it, or they can do it themselves. The art directors and their people are usually quite proficient at the various programs.
And I've heard good and bad things about that, right? Because
Yeah.
Now that the changes are so easy, a lot of changes get asked for.
Yes, and but what was surprising for me is when as my career kind of ended because of computers. I was very, very slow to make the change. I had fooled myself that these things were just too slow, and in reality, they were initially. But boy, when they became quick, it was a whole nother story. And I was sitting there going, "Oops, I'm a dinosaur overnight." And so it was interesting though to when the first art directors that I worked with, when I sent them transparencies, they would scan them in and then they would manipulate them. And then when the book, they wouldn't say anything, and I got the book cover and I go, "Wow, I don't remember making such a great lake in front of this building. In fact, I don't really remember a lake here at all." And it was interesting how they were able to manipulate things.
So when do you remember start seeing those kinds of changes? Is that like late 90s maybe, or?
Yeah, late 90s is where it really started. And I had friends who made the leap. Greg Winters was one for sure. The John and Hom and his brother, both of them made the leap. Greg Martin was doing some computer work towards the end of his career. So I just I had fooled myself, and I was just so far behind the curve that there was just no catching up.
So what was when you talk about the timeline of when you moved to Santa Fe, like, when was that? Were you still
Oh,
doing your illustration work from Santa Fe and sending things
yes,
in?
I was. I was. At that time, I was doing. Uh, I only did a few games after I got to Santa Fe. Really, not that many compared to how many I had done when I was, primarily working with Workhouse and um, the Nintendo Power and then the various companies that were based in L.A. Or New York through my rep in New York. But I ended up doing a lot of film work and still doing book covers after I made the move. But
Actually,
there were still a few games here and there.
wow,
See,
what year
I'm
was the
surprised to
move?
hear that actually. Well, yeah, I wanted to ask that because I'm surprised by your timeline because I had always associated like the purple mountains in the back of your game work with the fact that you were from Santa Fe because that's what I think Denny had told me at the time was he lives in Santa Fe and you'll see kind of that Santa Fe landscape in the back, and so to me like this is one of my favorite sort of Lee MacLeod illustrations. I had always kind of associated that light blue purple mountain in the background with you're in Santa Fe by then, but you're telling me that's not right.
Well, it is right in a weird sort of way. I spent a lot of time in Santa Fe prior to moving to Santa Fe,
Gotcha.
and I had this. Um, I was with a gallery in Santa Fe, and was doing these kind of unusual, um, hard to even describe, coyote uh, paintings with those kinds of backgrounds, and they just sort of found their way into my illustrations. And so that was sort of how that came about. And I was doing those in Pasadena based on reference and things that I had brought back from various trips out to Santa Fe.
Okay. So you start visiting there, you fall in love with the place, and you end up saying to Susan, "Let's pack up and go."
Yeah,
You're
yeah. That was more or less it. Susan was from Denver, and had spent a lot of time in the Colorado mountains, so she was more than happy to escape LA, so to speak.
Now, what brought you to Colorado College yourself? Were you in Colorado in high school or at that point, or yeah, how'd you end up there?
No, it was, yeah, no, it was interesting. I ended up at Colorado College primarily because my art teacher in high school said, "Hey, there's a good professor at Colorado College. You ought to check it out." And I visited several of the schools that I was thinking about going to, and when I saw Colorado College, it was just like it's a lovely campus. Pikes Peak is looms over it. It's a cool. It was just such a cool place that so I applied and very luckily got in, and so and definitely enjoyed my 4 years there. It was fantastic, and that's where I met Susan because she had come from she had grown up in Denver and was at Colorado College.
and Greg had Denver roots too, but you hadn't met him yet. You met him at school, right?
Correct. Some of Greg's family were living in Denver, but I had yet to meet him. I met him at Art Center. Actually, I met him in, I think, the very first class that I went to. And we had Conan the Barbarian in common. And I don't even know how that topic came up. And yet that was sort of our connection. It was like, oh, wait, you've been reading those comic books? You like John Buscema as an artist? And
Yeah.
yeah.
I was just gonna say because I know Greg was a huge Frazetta fan, and I know you collected comics or maybe
Yes,
collect still, and so I guess all that background you could just talk the lingo and you just knew and you could kind of forge a bond over that.
exactly. Which we did, and then I can't tell you. I think it was the second year that I was there that Greg moved into an apartment with me and another guy. And so, I mean, we were literally walking the hall to check on each other's artwork. And that continued after Art Center for a bit. And it was a lot of fun.
So you lived together too. I didn't know that.
Yes.
You know, and you mentioned the comic connection, and that reminds me that someone in someone in the game art group, I think, had posted some of your book covers, and there was one that was just very clearly like the Swamp Thing coming out of the TV.
Right.
You know,
Right.
so as soon as I saw that, I thought,
Yeah.
oh, he likes Swamp Thing, you
Yep.
know,
Yeah. I
or at
love
least
Swamp
used it.
Thing.
Yeah. Well,
Yep.
actually, that's right. I remember from our past conversations that you like Swamp Thing. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, and if readers are not familiar with that, that's sort of a classic comic book by Bernie Wrightson, you know, and a great character that was later adapted by Alan Moore and Steve Bissett and so on as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, well, it was Bernie Wrightson, so it was hard not to like. I mean, he's a genius.
So with that,
Yeah, I love Bernie's stuff as. Sorry, Sanford, go ahead.
No,
Go
I
ahead.
was gonna shift off because I'm out of my element on on Swamp Thing. I recognize it, of course, right?
Sorry.
No, it's fun. But I mean, you know, with you and Greg knowing each other so well, and I know both of you worked extensively for Denny Moore and Moore and Price. But I think Denny actually wasn't the first video game client that you'd done work for. As I was looking over some stuff, it looks like some of the early ones was all the stuff with Workhouse for Nintendo Power was earlier.
Yes.
And I think
yes.
Jamie Davidson was another one that was
Jamie Davidson design, right?
And did you? So
I think if I recall correctly, Jamie was pre-Moore and Price.
Yeah. Did you know her from Art Center, or how did that happen?
I did actually. We were in the same class, and I had no idea until she contacted me that she had become, had her own company and had become quite a well-known designer in the San Francisco area, and it was kind of fun to reconnect.
Yeah, and for listeners, one of the ones that Lee did for Jamie Davidson Design is gave for Ubisoft called BAT. I know that one's a PC game, but very popular in Europe. A lot of the French collectors have probably contacted you or had interest or want to know where's the original, and but that was one.
Yes, that. Yeah. No, a couple of French collectors have contacted me, and I can't. Since I've sold off a lot of my originals, I can't. I always say, well, gee, if I wish I'd paid more attention to who has it, but so you could talk to them.
Yeah. Now the other one is the other stuff that just for people more generally on Jamie Davidson Design. I think she'd done some stuff with Maxis and The Sims. I don't really know which ones, but I know, I think for a lot of listeners, knowing even the names of the design firms and the involvement, I think is very new for a lot of people. So I just really loved, actually I'll pull it up. You had a book you put together, Lee, of your game art, and I'm going to load it up here on the screen just because, for people
yes,
aren't familiar, you've been one of few illustrators for their game work that's really, taken stock of your full video game art career. And you've kind of got, starting from, 1989 up to 2005 and all the different pieces, who you did them for. I'm grateful, right? As we talked a little last night, but I'm, about 5-6 years kind of interested in this material, and having you document it so well is informative, and certainly documents your career.
Well, thanks. It's funny. I put this book together primarily for kind of friends and family. It's published through Blurb, and then also for the grandkids. I figured, okay, you guys are going to be, you don't have the original art, but you're going to be stuck looking at this at least a couple of times. And, but it was very an interesting, sort of strange trip through, my illustration years, looking back on the game art, primarily because, well, for two reasons. Oftentimes, I was just totally focused on getting a image that made the client happy. And oftentimes they would give me a description of sort of how the game was played, occasionally screenshots, and which were, at least initially, very unsophisticated, nothing compared to where games ended up. And so there was a lot of imagination in it, but I didn't really focus on the games themselves. And so in putting together the book, I had this illustration, and I had to say to myself, gosh, who did I do that for? And what was that game? And so it was fun to do actually, it was very interesting to do the research. I had to sort of research my own career.
Yeah, there were
Yeah,
several.
and there's quite. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say there were several that I had never known was your work, like until Dan flipped through the book with me one day, and I got to see some of the pages, and I said, "Oh my God, that's Lee!" Right? And I thought I was like, "Okay, I know the Rolling Thunder games, I know the Ultima games, and this one here, Lands of Lore. I never heard of the game, I've never played it, but I'm going through an old magazine, I see the image, and I'm like, wow, I want to know who this artist is, because if I can figure it out and find out, who it is, can I find the original? It just looks so good." And then Dan goes, "Oh, yeah, that's Lee." Right. And like, I was like, oh crap, it's not, it's not a new discovery for me. Right. But it was in that book. Right. And so,
right.
It's just a fun memory for me.
Given that we have a primarily male audience, should we bring up Deathbringer?
Alrighty.
Certainly.
So actually, Deathbringer is your. I'm going to load it up here, but it's your first game box illustration that you did.
Yes,
that's another reason I wanted to talk about it. Yeah, so tongue-in-cheek jokes aside, but yeah, so this is where it starts. And I think you had said, Lee, that you were pointed towards was it a Boris as a reference?
Yes,
for the girl?
For basically much, the overall illustration, Boris had done something remarkably similar to this. And so I tried really hard I was sort of mimicking his, how he had placed his figures, but I tried really hard not to paint it like Boris would have. Not that painting like Boris is easy, because he's quite the genius, but exactly. This is what that's the one. They said, this is what we want, only we want the wizard on the other end of it. So Boris is a personal hero of mine, and I certainly didn't want to, be the guy that was directly copying Boris. So I was trying hard not to make it look too Boris-like.
No, it's funny. It does look like the pose is there, but the execution is different. So it's fun, like having you remember the prompt. But then what I really liked is, I hope you enjoy as you have these conversations with us, and the recent book, The Art of the Box. You shared some stories, so it was fun that one of the artists that you shared a studio with, Steve Huston, I think is the male model here, right?
Right. Correct.
And the female is maybe
is it Huston or Houston?
Houston.
That's what I thought.
Yes.
Paradigm.
Yeah.
Right.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go. And so I think you'd said in the interview for the Art of the Box book that Steve had been a model in quite a bit of your game pieces.
That's correct. He was a bodybuilder, a boxer, a very, very good painter, and remains so today, primarily fine art. And he was, he he also was illustrated. So, and illustrators were always willing to help each other out because it was like, I mean, it was hard to find somebody who would go, oh gosh, I'll take off all my clothes except for a loincloth and stand there with a sword to give you some reference. And the female art figure is also was an illustrator for a number of years and has gone on to be a fine artist. She paints a lot of figures, ballerinas, and she's very, very talented as well. And once again, she was willing to do it because she understood that it was just really hard to find people to do this kind of thing.
So, I'm not very good at recognizing, because I imagine you'd probably change the faces and things, right? That they would pose to help give you the posing, right? The structures for the characters, the arrangements, the photographs. But I know I was going through your art, and I can't recognize which ones would be Steve.
Yeah, this is Steve as well, in the wearing the yellow. He had in real life short hair. And if you knew Steve Houston, you would know that was Steve Houston.
Okay.
The one thing about the games were that it wasn't like movie work where there was a recognizable actor. So if you had a friend and with muscles and a strong jaw, he could become any number of game characters.
So do
Sanford, I know that one piece that Steve modeled for, maybe you want to bring it up, is that Super C poster for Nintendo Power.
Yep.
That would be one. And I think, Lee, that you had, so I presume Steve is the one on the left, correctly?
Correct.
And then on the right was a tennis player?
Yeah. He was a tennis pro in Pasadena, California, and a good sport. And so I was able to get both these guys to come into the studio and pose for this. And it was the first piece I did for Nintendo Power magazine. So, and once again, there's those Santa Fe mountains.
Yeah, I was just thinking that as you were talking, those mountains are right there. And this is another piece that's kind of interesting from another perspective too. Like, is this one where there was a bit of photography as the underpainting?
Yes.
Because I that's a technique that, I think like not all artists use. You used it maybe more extensively than some others, but essentially you would, I think, take a photo and then kind of paint on top of it, ending up with, artwork over top of the photo that changed and obscured the photo, but basically using the photo as underdrawing.
Correct. I would usually assemble, in other words, figures. The two of them were not in the studio at the same time, but so I would color Xerox my photos of them, paste them onto a board, and draw in around them, do various other things, then take have a photo made of shot of that whole thing. So I was working on a single surface and not a lot of pasted together stuff. And then I would paint all over the top of that. And it was sort of like a poor man's, Photoshop. It was before Photoshop was really operational, and certain clients wanted a slightly more photographic look. And I learned this from another artist who I shared art space with, but a number of illustrators were doing it at the time, and it was a successful look if you wanted it to sort of borderline photography.
Right. I think that some of the movie posters were done that way at the time too, right? Like I can think of Mike Bryan's RoboCop as having been done that way.
He was one of the pioneers.
There we go.
And it was a kind of a new look, somewhere caught in between, so to speak.
Yeah, and it looks like I was going through some
So,
of the work for More and Price, and it looks like, as you got a little bit later into your illustration career that, or maybe Denny's preferences, that I didn't see it requested a lot, right? I pulled up this one of the Sega CD games, Rise of the Dragon, but
Right.
do you remember, kind of, well, actually first, how did you end up getting linked up with Denny Moore? How did you end up meeting him? Or did you meet him, I guess? It's kind of
I got linked up with Denny Moore through Greg Martin. I think at one point Greg must have said to him, because he was working with him, you might consider Lee MacLeod, and so they called me, and of course this is back in the day where we faxed sketches back and forth and did all that kind of stuff. So it was all and a lot of phone conversations. Virtually no email, and so it was uh, it was exciting because I knew who Denny was, and I knew who of More and Price, so it was excited to be contacted and have the chance to work with them. And I think sometimes part of this is of what the imagery looked like kind of was based on the subject matter. So a piece like this could have much more of a photo look than, say, something that was just a gargoyle sitting there, or goblins coming running down a field or something. And so it was somewhat dependent on the subject matter, what the game was about and the style.
Do you remember
can
what
I
your first
can I
piece
bring
was
up
for?
an
Oh, go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say, maybe on that note, can I bring up an original that I think you might have used the technique on, and maybe we can kind of discuss that?
Sure.
Okay, so we'll see. If I'm off, then this is going to be really embarrassing. So we'll see.
No worries.
But this is the Serious Sam piece that you did.
Correct.
So I hope everybody can kind of see that okay.
And I'll pull it up on the main screen
it's
also.
okay, wonderful. Yeah, it's like incredibly lifelike. Like the face and the arm and so on is incredibly lifelike. And you had mentioned maybe using photo underdrawing, but I mean, I could see that you've done paint and pencil crayon and so on way over top of everything. The end result is marvelous, and I love in the foreground here. It seems to me, and I could be wrong, but it seems to me like you've almost done the grass in a way that the computer games of the time would have rendered the grass.
Right.
Am I
No,
out to
you're right.
lunch?
No, you're not out to lunch. That was intentional. This one was an interesting. This is the closest I probably ever came to creating something that would have lent itself to being built on the computer. Um, I had to steal all kinds of figures and off the game itself. Um, by now, the Serious Sam was later in my career. By now, the games were getting far more sophisticated, and they really wanted the characters that they had there to look like those characters. So this was a complicated assembly that I put together. It was all color Xerox rather than photography, because I could color Xerox. You could blow things up and down, make the gun bigger, and so you paste it all together, this whole thing together, took a photograph of this massive paste up, then started painting on that to try to pull it all together.
And then, do you
Wow.
remember?
Yeah, I mean, it worked out amazing.
Yeah, and I pulled up a second image here, and I know you'd sent us both of them, Lee. And I think there's some changes to the gun and other things. Do you remember if these are changes you had any involvement in, or you finished the painting that Dan showed, you sent it off, and then this is how it was published? Do you remember?
No, they actually had me redo it. So I ended up doing 2 paintings of Serious Sam.
Oh, that's incredible.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's how that came about. They just, there was, I don't know why there was an executive decision that they wanted it to look different, and the cannon to be replaced with this uh, more modern looking weapon.
Yeah, I
Now,
could see that. There's a difference in the stance too. Like you're kind of
Right,
on the first one, he's kind of back for the recoil, and
right,
on the second one, it's more aggressive.
right, right. And I think one of the things that one of the changes they decided to make was also they wanted his T-shirt logo to show, and which it does in this one, and it's lost behind that cannon in the other.
Okay.
huh.
Yeah, interesting. Like that seems like such a nothing, but I get from their perspective why they might want that, but
Right,
yeah,
right. From a marketing standpoint, maybe, if they want to market things with that logo, then it's nice if the logo actually appears on the cover of the game.
right, right.
Now, I've heard of some illustrators who one shared a story doing work for Nintendo, and they do the entire painting, and Nintendo says, "Hey, I want it differently," and as the illustrator, they were plenty fine with it because they're getting paid twice. Um, to do the
Right.
second painting. Is that how this one would have worked out as well for Serious Sam?
Yes, that's how this worked as well. It was fun. Yeah, it wasn't a problem. They said, we're willing
Okay,
to pay for this again.
good. So then it's not a salty memory. That's good.
No, no. And basically, it was it was rare that there were too many problems along those lines. Most of the companies and the art and the design firms were pretty good about paying for things, for changes, and for that kind of thing. I mean, it was just sort of part of the whole process. People just change their minds for various reasons. Sometimes maybe I always wondered if sometimes maybe a person wasn't consulted that sort of should have been, and had the power to say, no, this is the reason we want to do this differently.
That makes sense.
I
Yeah,
was
that makes sense.
Lee, I was kind of hoping to bring up some of your Ultima artwork, and one because
Sure.
I think it's some of your best known work and very well loved and regarded series, and I think I was going to start here with the first one that you did.
Got it.
And I think this is one you remember quite fondly. It's one of your favorites.
Yes, I was very happy with this piece. This is not over photography like the other kind. You can, and I think you can sort of see that there's a difference between those that were where I used that technique and all the Ultimas were done just basically paint and Prismacolor and some airbrush on an illustration board. But I was very happy with how this came out. And I posed for the figure, so um, and all the subsequent ones, because then I kind of not realizing there were going to be more, and then suddenly it was like, oh, I guess I have to be this character every time, and I have to really kind of make myself a little stronger than I was in real life.
Yeah, I mean, it turned out amazing. I've always loved this one too, in terms of like the oeuvre of your box art. It's one that really stands out. It's just beautiful. The colors, the pose is perfect. A nice menacing snake. The subject matter is great as from a gamer collector point of view. I mean, there's nothing that like there's some where there's nothing you'd change, and to me that's it's beautiful. It's one of them.
Until you
Well,
said
thanks.
that,
Yeah.
and I love them as well. And this is one where, again, the color of the mountains and things, and it's one of those small comments Dan made to me, I don't know, 4 years ago. And now I'm always going to see the purple mountains, that color. It's like that's my reference point for your work. But I never realized until now that, because I have never really played the Ultima games, that the white robed character was the same, character or person in each one, and then from your end that you're then posing for each of them. It's kind of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the advantages to sharing space with a photographer was that not only did he shoot artwork, but he also shot reference for all kinds of different illustrators. And so there was a whole big space where, we could, and for instance, I could garb myself up in an outfit like this. Didn't have the boots, but was able to find at a costume shop the white pants and the white shirt, and then he would set up the lighting and create that, the pose for this. And I had to, once I went to paint it, I had to add some things in, obviously, but I think I was holding a ruler at the time and not, but he also, it was interesting because it became also part of his profession to shoot for other illustrators as well. So
it's such an unusual and I imagine difficult pose to capture.
it was tricky also because you're kind of looking down. And I didn't, want him, when you look down on things get foreshortened. So there's kind of a cheat here where you're above it, but the figure is not as foreshortened as perhaps it would have been. And I do remember going, I think I need to extend this.
And this one would have been before Denny as well. And so did you, I kind of did you have more freedom, right? Like with work for Denny Moore, was there more clear vision of exactly what they wanted? Whereas other art directors, maybe you would have gotten to
this. Yeah. This particular game series, I had a fair amount of leeway with. I mean, there was definite input, but working with Denny had both himself and art directors, and you got you're absolutely correct. They were a lot more maybe exacting in terms of what they wanted, but there was always a sketch stage to all of this stuff, and Moore and Price were completely open to you throwing your own sketch in if you wanted to. They definitely take a look at it. So if halfway through the project on the sketching and you're sending them maybe 4 different sketches that they've requested, and you suddenly have an idea, you could include yours, and they would definitely pay attention to that.
Oh, it's a lot of fun. There was actually, I realized I've never seen any of your preliminary work. So I was kind of curious with, I think it's standard, right? A lot of times the illustrator will, as you've described, that sketching phase, draw it out, get some additional direction. And I know at least for one of yours, there's this game Tempo, and I'll pull that one up. I do want to come back to something on Ultima, but for Tempo, I think those were actually, I think Greg Winters had done the designs on those, and then you did the painting. How common
I did
was
a
that?
painting, and it was not uncommon. Usually if you did the sketches, you got it, but sometimes people were super busy, and I think maybe Greg Moore and Price had said, hey, we need you to do these 2 illustrations, and we're not going to send you this 3rd one because there's no possible way you could do this. I mean, Greg was an incredible hard worker. He was one of the best of any of us at staying up forever, and but everybody had, at a certain point had to sleep, and that's my guess as to why I got this. But what's interesting is I think I recall they used this, and then they actually had Greg make some changes on it. On my original. So that also was not uncommon.
Oh, actually, huh? I knew. Yeah, I'm gonna try
Yeah,
to pull
you
up in
sort
the
of had to leave your
background.
yeah, you had to leave
Well,
your ego behind.
yeah, makes sense. The monster on the right hand with the skin with the sort of boils on it reminds
Right.
me a little bit of Alien Storm.
Yeah.
Uh, Sanford, the monster picking up the mailbox or whatever. Yeah,
Oh yeah,
that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
you could see the change to the face there in
Right. The
particular.
face and the shoes. I'm pretty.
Right,
Yeah.
right. The tread's different. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So
so you think Greg went in and changed that?
yes, I think Morin Price sent this piece to Greg and the painting, and he made those changes. And what was interesting, I just assumed that the previous version, the one I had done, was never printed, but I subsequently learned from other people that no, we saw it like this, and then this one was done as well.
So how would that have worked given that you had the original and that your original had the different face, the different shoes? He would have what? Like on what like media would he have done the changes?
Well, and that's, to be honest, I can't really remember, but I think this piece may have been sent up to Morin Price, the original art, and then it was changed. They sent it to Greg.
so he
But the
probably
original, so the
painted
original as it
directly on the
is
painting.
It
today,
wasn't. It was the actual painting was
yeah,
potentially
right on the
changed.
painting. Okay.
Yeah.
And I think
That's what I think happened.
and I did, as we were trying to figure out this mystery earlier, I think the Adam Harvey in our Facebook group has bought some artwork from you, Lee, and I think that original
Yes.
came from you. So I imagine you did your version. It went to Morin Price. It goes over to Greg. Greg paints over the top, and then it does work its way back to you, which is a fortunate sequence.
Correct. Yes. It was it was one of those things where you kind of say to yourself, "Oh darn, I wish they'd send it back to me." But Greg did a great job, and so I guess it's more or less it had its use. It got printed, the version I did, and then it's a compilation of two guys.
Yeah.
Right, a collaboration. Yeah.
Yeah, collaboration.
Sanford, I know this is one of your favorites.
Yeah, and actually, this gives me an excuse. I've got it here, but I get to bring up an original, right? So Dan, yeah, you mentioned right some of the boils on the monster for tempo looking similar, and so I am fortunate enough via Dan to own the original for Alien Storm, and this is I think I've told you this, Dan, but I mean this is one of very few games that I actually remember playing as a kid. Everybody had Sonic and some of those, and so I never owned Alien Storm, but I had a cousin that lived an hour away. You see him a few times a year, and either he owned the cartridge, they rented it, and so kind of a beat 'em up you go across, and so I knew I remembered the name, and I knew Dan had it, and it worked out, and Dan wasn't going to sell it to me, and I was like, well, shit, how am I going to get this thing? So luckily, I found some artwork. I found some artwork Dan liked, and he was able to say, I'm not going to take money, but I'll take a trade, right? And so I found some art. He was happy, and I ended up with this one. And I've always wondered, what's the story? Like, how did the mailbox end up in this? Is there a story there?
All right. So once again, I have never played the game, but at least in one of the screenshots, and there was a mailbox and it was requested that this monster be coming up sort of as if from under the mailbox, and I went, okay. And so in the sketches, was what happened. And And there it is.
Yeah.
And to be honest, I really don't know.
Well, I mean, it does make sense in the game, right? You're walking by and the mailboxes are just, oh, it's a mailbox. And you walk by and the monster pops out, then you have to fight it. So, I mean, it is kind of from the game. But I always thought
Okay. So I was thinking that it had to be something like that. Yeah. But they definitely requested the mailbox.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. I was curious, like, whose genius that was, and like I've always appreciated and liked it, and it's a fun detail.
It wasn't it it was one of the items that they requested be in the sketch.
The whole piece turned out so well. Like, I love the flexion on the leg and the lighting, the tentacle wrapped around it. Like, it's I think it's one Sanford and I both really enjoy. The composition's great with the way the tentacles are coming in and a big circular sense to it. It's awesome.
Oh, thanks. So, it was a fun piece to do. It really was.
Is it possible? Was this maybe one of the very first ones you did for More and Price? I was kind of looking at the timeline.
Yes, I think it was. As I recall, it was one of the early ones.
Hi, awesome. I'm very happy to have it. I'm happy you retained it. Ended up with Dan, came to me, and I've appreciated your work a lot, and I'm happy to own something from you.
Yeah, and game companies were pretty good about returning art. Book cover companies were good about it. The ones who weren't were movie companies. Movie companies tended to hang on to things. And I think I could have potentially said, hey, I want my piece back because you didn't buy the piece. You just bought the imagery. But you never wanted to burn a bridge. And no one really had an idea that these things would have a total life beyond the initial usage.
So actually, speaking of initial usage and whether they would have a life beyond it, I think if we go back to Ultima, there was one that I think it may be two pieces where you finished it, it was published, but then you later made personal changes.
Yes, I did.
To the original. So I'll pull up the box first, but I'd love to get the story here from you. So
sure,
this is the published box that everybody would know for Ultima: The False Prophet for the Super Nintendo. But this is the original, the image that you shared with us.
Correct. This one, I really like the piece. In the sketch, he had the horns, and they asked me to remove them. And so that was the only major change in that figure. But I just always thought, gosh, I'd love to have this much more elaborate background behind this thing. And it just was sitting there and I couldn't resist. And so I added in all the clouds and the castle and the various other items. And it was just one of those things where sometimes, if you have nothing else to do, you decide that, oh, I have to change something. And again, if I had known that these paintings would ultimately be collectible, I probably wouldn't have changed it, because then I sort of feel like, well, it's not exactly the way it was published. But at the time, it was, I had a dead period or something, and I was going, oh, I'm going to play with this painting. There was one of the things about Frank Frazetta that was very difficult for everyone, was that he changed everything all the time. So they actually started taking things away from him, so he would just leave them alone.
Well, and then with him having had that stroke in the 90s, and then teaching himself to paint left-handed, he's going in 20 years later, left-handed, post-stroke, and the changes weren't always for the better as a result.
Correct. And but once again, he just had an idea and he couldn't resist, and so there he was trying to working a piece that was sort of basically a masterpiece to begin with, so needed to be left alone.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah, exactly.
with that said, and the changes to this piece, at least to my eye, I mean, some of these changes look reminiscent of what you're doing now. And I guess reminiscent is not the right word, but future looking to what you're doing now
Yeah.
with plein air. And we'd love to hear about, I can pull up your website, a couple originals. We'd love to take a chance to show some of what you're working on now. But
Sure.
But I guess I'll turn it over to you, kind of in your words. What is plein air? When did you start, and how did you, land that's what you wanted to be working on these days?
And just for the audience, before you answer that, Lee, like let's, because we were talking about different pronunciations of things. Like plain is like PLEIN, right? Like it just means
Correct.
kind of outside, I think,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Not just like regular air.
Right.
But I'll let you take it from there.
So basically, once the computer really took off as a tool for illustration, I was so far behind the curve that it was almost impossible to catch up. And I'd actually reached a sort of a point where I'd always been occasionally doing paintings outside, occasionally doing landscapes, and I just sort of switched over to into that whole genre. And one of the things I really liked about it was, once again, you're not doing an exact copy of what was out there. You are designing, you are changing colors, you are playing with things, but a bush, as long as the bush looks like a bush, you're okay. And it's not like I have to render some famous actor's face. And so it was in some ways more fun because you got to play with color and ranging shapes. And so I've been lucky in that it found a market, and I've really enjoyed it. Not all my landscapes are done outside. I usually bigger pieces are often done in the studio. They're usually based on smaller paintings that I've done outside. Plein air has become its own thing, and there are plein air events all over the country, hundreds per year. And I don't go to very many. You have to apply, and they're quite a ways off, generally. But it is amazing how many people have gotten really involved in this and become very good at it. And you really essentially have a couple hours to pull off a painting because the light changes too much. So a painting done like this, a big chunk of it is a memory painting. It changed. So, the sky was neat, and I took a paintbrush and made a little shape for where I wanted the orange and yellows to be. That was actually up there, but by the time I, went to paint it, it was long gone. But I was still able to work with the colors that were still out there. And the tree, of course, stayed the same, fortunately. Just became more of a silhouette. But so it's a kind of it's an interesting thing to get into, in that you really do have to react pretty quickly.
And so how long have you been at this new direction, Lee?
It's been, at this point, I'd say a good 15 years.
Terrific. And, I think in the course of our conversations, you'd mentioned you'd done some trips with, I think Greg and also Craig Nelson at some
Correct.
point, maybe.
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
So that's got to be a lot of fun.
Those were great. Yeah, they were a lot of fun. Craig Nelson became a very good friend. He was an instructor of mine at Art Center, and he was not. He's not much older than I am, He was one of the. He was just he's kind of a genius. Everyone talks about Craig and says there's all my artist friends, and they go, "Is there anything that guy can't paint?" But so yeah, Craig and Greg and I and other artists traveled in Europe several times together and painted in France and Italy, and we had a great time. It was a lot of fun, and it was basically plein air. You're outdoors painting. It's not always a landscape. A lot of times it was structures, old castles or buildings, or the French countryside with a farmhouse. It was a lot of fun. So
maybe I could take a second and just bring an original. I have a landscape here that you were kind enough to sell me, and I'll just grab it and then I'll comment. One sec.
Sure.
So it was fun as I was going through these and I was trying to pull up images that looked to be available, right? So things that were available for sale on your website or the World
Right.
Gallery. So anyone kind of watching, most of the images I've pulled up may be available for purchase if they interest you. And well, Dan's got one here, so let's see what you got, Dan.
Yeah. So this is landscape. Lee was kind enough to sell me, and I really enjoy hanging this up in my office at work. I love the game paintings, but I save those for home. I don't really feel like it's appropriate to have that kind of imagery up on the walls at work. So this sort of thing allows me to kind of enjoy. I kind of know what it is, but everybody else walking by would enjoy it as a landscape, but not really think anything else of it. It's kind of work appropriate. So I'd highly recommend anybody that's interested to check out Lee's website or the gallery, and it's a wonderful little thing to have on the wall and enjoy daily.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. Thank you. It definitely keeps me out of trouble.
That's good. I'm sure the grandkids will be keeping you out of trouble for a while based on
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's remarkable how fast they can move and how many there will be.
And how much energy they have too.
Oh,
right?
Yes. If I could harness that energy, it would be fantastic. I watching both my daughters as parents, and I'm going, I know that my wife and I did this when we raised them, but I don't know how we could have ever done that. I mean, it's just almost exhausting to watch.
Well, and if you add it further, that if you were pulling all-nighters while you had kids, doing the game work and the illustration stuff, I mean, that's just doubly impressive.
Well, it was. I think youth has got has a different energy than it has faded, definitely. I'm glad I don't have to pull any all-nighters anymore, at least for painting purposes.
No kidding. I couldn't imagine doing it anymore either. Like I remember doing some when I was young, and I just no, thank you.
Yeah.
No, thank you.
It's lost its novelty.
That's exactly right.
So
that is
Lee,
exactly right.
If we do direct anyone to your artwork for plein air, is World Gallery where you would direct most people? Would it be through your website?
Yes, I either one. The website's fine, but World is where I generally send people. It's when you have a relationship with a gallery, I have one there and one in Fredericksburg, Texas, that also represents me, and they've got overhead and things, so I try to sell my work through those galleries.
Yeah, but I think this is the Texas one here that you mentioned.
Yes.
Lee, I've greatly appreciated getting to talk with you today and kind of run through the stories and the game art and up to what you're doing now. And just thank you. I really enjoyed
Thank
our
you so
conversation.
much, Lee. Yeah,
Sure.
it's been amazing to have a chance to chat and find out a little more and kind of go over some of your past work. It's been
Well,
awesome.
thank you. No, it was a lot of fun. I'm glad you asked me, and I was nervous, of course, but I've never considered myself much of a public speaker. But you guys made it really easy, so I
Terrific.
appreciate it. Thank you.
Hey, we enjoyed it. Well, I'm gonna say goodbye, everyone, and we'll see you back for our next episode.
Bye, everyone. We'll see you next time.
All righty.
Yeah.
See you, everybody.
Bye.